Okay. I noticed as I put this on, I got suspenders, so it makes it easy to clip it on. So I have somewhere to clip it on now, which is good. That's good. Okay. So we're going to start off with some review. We're going to start off with Joseph. So let's see here. Or, I'm sorry. We're going to start off with Moses, not Joseph. Whoa, this one's a little crazy. Okay. What did the Lord tell Moses concerning the future of the Amalekites? And that is in Exodus 17, verse 14, if somebody wants to turn and find that. The future of the Amalekites. I don't know. I'm gonna guess something along those lines, but we can find out. This one I actually didn't know. I didn't have the book till today, so I'm looking at these review questions too. Yeah, Exodus 17:14. Anybody get there yet? $17:14. Yep. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this in the book as a memorial to recite it to Joshua, and I will utterly wipe out the memory of Amalek and his people from under heaven." Okay. Oh, that was no wonder. Okay, and then we'll do some Joseph. Yellow. When did Joseph's brothers bow down to him? So you guys remember Joseph had a couple dreams, right, of his brothers bowing down to him. And they said, that's never going to happen. And then did it happen? And when did it happen? In Egypt, right? But when in Egypt? Do you remember what the surrounding circumstances were? Yep, when the family went to Egypt for food. That was when they bowed down to him. Okay. And then, anybody remember what we talked about last week? So we had, a couple weeks ago, we had Jesus anointed for burial, right? So his staying at Mary and Martha's house, and then Mary wiping his feet with her hair, right? And we also had the review of his early life then. And then last week, we had the triumphal entry, cursing the fig tree, right? And then the second cleansing of the temple. And then the results after cursing the fig tree. Okay. So what happened with the fig tree? Does anybody remember what the story of the fig tree is? It had leaves with no fruit. So Jesus is hungry, so he goes up to this fig tree that has leaves on it, and the only time they have leaves on it is when they're bearing fruit. So he goes up to it expecting there to be fruit. There's no fruit, right? So what's he do? He curses it, says there's never going to be fruit from you again, right? And then they come back to it later, and it's withered and gone, right? And right adjacent to that story, or sometimes right in between it, right in between the end caps of that story, is the second cleansing of the temple, right, where Jesus goes in and drives out the money takers and all that stuff out of the temple, right? Okay. All right, so today we're going to be studying 3 parables of Jesus, and then some argument that he has, some discussion that he has with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So give me 1 second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so you're 27 people. So that should be just under 9 people. Okay, so we're going to count off in nines. All right? So listen up. We're gonna change it up a little bit. I'm going to give each group of 9 one of the parables. Okay? What I want, if we can do this, is for each of us, each of the groups, to go around and just take about 10 minutes, read the parable with each other, right? Discuss it. Find something that you think is interesting about the parable, right? Summarize the parable, and then tell me, what does this tell us about the kingdom, if anything? Okay? All right, so we're going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Starting out, so you guys are the first group, and then you guys can just tag along with them. That way we have that side of the room, right? And then we'll do probably the third pew up and back, right? You guys are the second group, and then these last 2 pews, you guys can take your own group. Does that sound good? Yeah? Everybody good? Clear on the instructions? Okay. All right. Break. Go team. That's a great question. I got excited and forgot. That's the important part, right? So, okay. So, the first parable, right? So we're in Matthew 21. The first parable is the parable of the 2 sons. So we'll give that to the third group, these last 2 rows, the parable of the 2 sons. The second parable is the parable of the landowner. That's 21 verse 33 to the end of 21. And we'll give that to this side, right? And then the last parable is the parable of the marriage feast. And that's going to be chapter 22 through verse 14. And we'll give that to the last 3 rows back here. Okay? So parable of the 2 sons, which is verse 28 of Matthew 21. Matthew 21 verses 28 through 32. And then parable of the landowner, which is Matthew 21 verses 33 through 46. And then these last 3 rows back here, parable of the marriage feast, which is chapter 22 verses 1 through 14. Okay? Everybody good? Am I forgetting anything else? Like, this is the Bible? Like, yeah. Okay. All right. We're good. Go ahead and break up, and then we'll bring it back together here in probably 15 minutes. It should be on now. Yeah, can you hear what I'm saying? Check, 1, 2, yeah? Okay, there it goes. Sorry, I forgot. I turned it off because I figured nobody would want to hear me being loud while they're all discussing. So, what time is it? Okay, everybody about wrapped up?
Yeah,
Todd's
Todd's ready.
ready? Okay, all right. It's a good deal. Thank you for being willing to do that with me. Step outside of the comfort zone a little bit. Okay, so something that's kind of unique about these three parables, right? All right, so we've got throughout all the Gospels, Jesus' kind of call and response situation where the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right, they come to him and they say, hey, we've got a question, and we don't think you can answer it. And Jesus goes, okay, well, here's a parable. And he tells them, right? And then we have these series of parables. And these three are interesting because they're very pointed, right? There's like, and even in the parable of the landowner, verses 45, right? When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they understood that he was talking about them, which is like one of the very few times that you see, the Pharisees understood, right? And so this is where Jesus is making it clear, right? He's being very to the point. I am talking about you, right? And so they have to kind of get through that. So these are interesting parables for other reasons, but that is one of them. So let's start with the parable of the two sons. What did you guys find interesting about it? Give me a short summary. Oh, okay. Who was the two sons? Awesome. All right, I'll do the two sons. That's okay. That's all right. We'll come together again. Okay, so the parable of the two sons. What?
I guess there's confusion.
That's okay. I know. I'll do the parable of the two sons, and then we'll have this side do the parable of the landowner, and that side do the parable of marriage feast landowner. I'm getting confused here. Okay, parable of the two sons. There's a man who had two sons, right? He goes to the two sons. He tells both of them the same thing. Go do this thing for me, right? The first son says no. The second son says yes. But the first son realizes, oh man, I should have said yes, and goes and does what his father wanted him to do. And the second son doesn't actually end up going and doing it. He's sitting down playing video games or something. His dad's like, go do this thing. He's like, sure, in a minute, and then forgets, doesn't go do it. And Jesus asks them, which one was the son that did his father's will? And the Pharisees and the Sadducees go, well, of course it's the first one. And he says, see, even the prostitutes and the tax collectors are going to get into heaven before you do. Because of that, right? I like that he uses the sons, right? He's talking about, in each of these parables, he talks about a different relationship, right? But in this first one, it's the son relationship. So he's saying, the father is coming to you, his children, and he's asking you to do these things. And that seems like a little bit more pointed to me. It seems like a little bit more like, you should do these things because you respect and love your father, but you didn't, right? And so there's a very, I think, sharp distinction there. And then this about the kingdom, right? So this tells us it's another good example of what's called the upside-down kingdom, right? Which is this idea of the first shall be last and the last shall be first. So Jesus comes to them and he tells them, like, the son who said yes, right? That's a good son. But he didn't follow through. So he's not a good son, right? The son who said no is a bad son because he should have said yes. He should have agreed to do what his father wanted him to do. But he came back and did it anyways. So in the end, he was the good son, right? That first shall be last, last shall be first kind of situation. So that's what Jesus, I think, is trying to point out about the kingdom in this specific parable. Okay, let's go to the parable of the landowner. Matthew 21:33 through 46. What do we have about that? Short summary.
Person owned a vineyard, rented it out to some people. When it came time to get
who's going to take care of it. Right, right.
Jesus just said that, well, that's when when in verse 45, that the Pharisees saw him, he was talking about them.
Yeah, yeah. They're starting to realize, like, oh, wait, that's us, right? Anything anybody found particularly interesting about that passage?
Right. Well, I brought up in verse 42 that didn't you ever read this in the scriptures? So they knew the scriptures, but they went over there or they didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
And they knew, because that was their job. They knew the scriptures.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Jesus does this a lot throughout the Gospels, and I think I, for the longest time, missed how hilarious this is, right? You got these people whose entire lives are devoted to studying the Bible, or to the Torah, right? Their entire lives are devoted to studying the Torah. So they come to him with this, like, snappy question. They're like, oh, well, we got a question for you. And he's like, have you never read it? And they're like, I mean, our entire lives. So, yeah. And he's like, well, then you've missed the entire point. And he points out at these, like, simple verses, right, that are very clear cut. And he's like, what are you reading? We can't, it's like Nathan instructed you guys to read something. So, you can't even be reading the right thing. But yeah, interesting. Okay. And then, is there anything that anybody thought in particular this points out about the kingdom? Sure. What do you
What
think?
he's saying, basically, because, like you said, they knew
Right.
what the Bible said. They could quote it.
Yeah.
Since they were little.
Right.
And the reality is, when all through history it said you're going to trip over the chief cornerstone. You're going to fall. You're going to trip.
Yep.
And then he's quoting that scripture. And then he says, because of all of that, he's actually taking it from them and he's giving it to someone else.
Right.
And then he's actually sort of telling a little bit about the future, if you will, that the Jewish people, he's taking it from them and giving it to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have him even giving you sort of a prophecy right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a fantastic transition into the parable of the marriage feast, right? Because what's the parable of the marriage feast? Anybody want to summarize it? Go for it.
I think we've had a lot of different discussion about the idea. I think too, I hadn't noticed until we went over that in the other two, he tells a story and then gives the point. In this one, he gives the point and then tells the story. Because he talks about the kingdom of heaven is compared to.
Right.
Of course, we compare the kingdom to God and his son, Jesus, and we talk about how that the ones that were invited didn't come, and so he said it was open to all, even the bad and the good. And the part about that, some of the servants went out, invited people in, and they were killed, and some didn't come back. And
Yeah.
that's just kind of like a lot of the people in the church sometimes, and then sometimes they suffer, but God will seek the, revenge in the end, because he said that he's gonna, King was angry and had that. I had a Bible about how that even when you come in, the tradition was for the wedding garments to be given to people, but one of the men that came didn't accept it, and so it is our choice to accept
Right.
what
Right.
he's saying. So, okay, the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's great, and that's exactly, I think, what Jesus is trying to point out. That's a weird section, that those last three verses, which are verses 11 through 4, or I guess 4 verses, 11 through 14. And I'll read that real fast. But when the king came in to see the dinner guests, he saw a man there who was not dressed appropriately in wedding clothes. And he said, "Friend, how did you come in here without wearing the wedding clothes?" Does anybody's translation say that we're provided for you? Or talk about the wedding clothes being provided? Okay. See, mine has that a little section that's built in that says, so why are you not wearing the wedding clothes that were provided for you? And the man was speechless and without excuse. Then the king said to the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him into the darkness outside. And in that place there will be weeping and grinding of teeth forever. For many are called, but few are chosen. That's kind of like a weird section, right? We have this parable where it starts off and he invites people. He says, okay, you guys come in, and they don't want to come. So he says, invite everyone, right? Except for that guy, because he's not dressed appropriately. Kick him out, right? It's kind of a weird situation there. But I think that's exactly what Jesus is trying to get at, right? We can look at it now with hindsight, right, and see like what we run the risk of reading into it, but I think we can read into it a purpose, which I think is what you're going to say.
It really is important to know how we're supposed to be dressed
Mm.
to represent Jesus. He gives us the guidelines. He tells us this is how we're supposed to do it. And you can look at a lot of different Christian religions that are out there, and they're not even, they call themselves a Christian.
Mhm.
They can't wait to go to heaven, but the reality is their lifestyle, they're not dressed for it.
Mm.
And that's really what he's saying, that, the kingdom of heaven is holy.
Right.
We have to be holy like he was.
Yeah.
And we can, but we have to be dressed with what he gives us.
Right.
His sacrifice, it's really important to be part of his kingdom,
Right.
to be wearing the clothes he asked us to put on.
Right.
And that's that rebellion that people, they think, I'll do it my way, but then I'll go. And that's what this man's doing. He's trying to get heaven his own way.
So what are the clothes, and this can be anybody too, anybody can answer, but what are the clothes that we should be wearing? Yeah, baptism, faith, repentance, right? I would say that the clothes that we are to wear, right, is Jesus. It's the blood of Christ, right? We're washed, we are putting on the blood of Christ. Given a robe. Yeah. Okay. All right. So throughout all three of these, right, there's a lot of really interesting sections. I was telling somebody yesterday. I mean, we could probably spend hours just talking about these, but so the religious leaders are depicted in each of them. Who are the religious leaders in the very first passage, in the parable of the two sons? Since that was my one, the sons, right? Well, the disobedient son specifically was the religious leaders in that passage. Okay, who were the religious leaders in the parable of the landowner? Not the sons.
The Pharisees and the Sadducees, those that he's entrusted his great, beautiful kingdom to.
The tenants.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tenants, right? And then who were the religious leaders in the very last section in the parable of the marriage feast? Sorry? Yeah, the first ones who were invited, right? Okay, good deal. Yeah. We got about 10 minutes left, so we'll go ahead and move on. But those are really good passages. If there's any more comments or anybody else has anything they want to talk about, feel free to talk about it afterwards. I'd love to sit down and talk about it too. I could talk about these things forever. They're fun. But we're going to have to move on. So we're going to go next. We're just going to continue on. So the next lesson here is in Matthew 22. We're going to start in verse 15. And we're going to read all the way to the end. So I'll go through the very first section here. I'll just read it so we can make it kind of quick. Then the Pharisees went and conspired together, plotting how to trap him by distorting what he said. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and that you teach the way of God truthfully, without concerning yourself about what anyone thinks of your teachings or says, for you are impartial and do not seek anyone's favor." Just real quick while we get into this, who are the Pharisees? They're religious leaders, right? What's the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Does anybody know? Oh, I think I heard it. Who said it? Yeah. Which one believed in the resurrection? The Pharisees. The Pharisees believe in the resurrection. I heard a very funny mnemonic tool yesterday is the Sadducees are sad, you see, because they don't believe in a resurrection, which I thought was really funny, so I figured I'd share that. But yeah. They're sad, you see. So the Sadducees don't believe in a resurrection. The Pharisees do believe in a resurrection. And who are the Herodians? That's okay. It only appears a couple times, right? I hadn't actually seen this before. So I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page with this so that we know what's about to go on. Yeah, actually, they were a political party. So they were a party, right? They supported Herod Antipas, and they thought that the Romans should be leading them. They were kind of capitulating to the Romans. So they're called Herodians because they support Herod, right? And the Herodians, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees, none of the three ever got along because the Sadducees and the Pharisees viewed that the Herodians were giving Israel up. They're like, you don't care about Israel at all because you're willing to let Rome rule, right? And the Herodians thought that the Sadducees and the Pharisees were being stupid and disturbing the peace. So they never got along. But we have these interesting passages where the Sadducees go to the Herodians. And they say, hey, this guy's causing us trouble. We don't like you, you don't like us, but could we take care of this guy? Right? So we have I think that's really interesting there. One other thing that I found that was interesting when I was studying this is there's a lot of scholars, according to what I was reading, that believed that the Herodians thought Herod was a Messiah. So they actually upheld Herod as the Messiah, right? What's Messiah mean? What? No? Anointed one, right? The one who's anointed? Yeah? Okay, so they thought that Herod was anointed, and what that meant was that they thought that Herod was going to bring peace to Israel, right? Because he was going to give them great prosper through Rome. Okay? So that's just an interesting context that we have here for the Herodians coming in with the Pharisees. So they say, teacher, we know that you're sincere. You teach everything that you mean. You don't care what other people think. Tell us then, what do you think? Is it permissible to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? This is why it gets really interesting, because the Herodians, right, they're a political party. So of course this is the question they ask. They come in, they say, what about taxes? Right? Because that's the first thing they can think. And you can just picture that board meeting, right? You know, the Pharisees come in, they're like, we've tried. We can't figure out what to do to him. He answers everything we say, and we don't even understand it half the times. And the Herodians are like, taxes. Nobody understands taxes, right? So they say, okay, we're going to go ask him taxes. But Jesus, aware of their malice, asked, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the poll tax. And they brought him a denarius. And Jesus said to them, whose likeness and inscription is on this? They said, Caesar's. Then he said to them, then pay to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard this, they were caught off guard, and they left him and went away. Okay. So this, I'll cut to it. This kind of begs an interesting question, right? He says, what's Caesar's? He says, show me a coin, right? And he says, the image of Caesar is on it, right? Therefore, it's Caesar's. So pay to him what is Caesar's. And pay to God what is God's. What's God's? Everything else? That's definitely one way to look at it, right? What has God's image on it? Us, right? We're made in God's image. Isn't that fascinating? Jesus says, bring me a coin. Whose image is on that? And they say Caesar's. So he says, give to Caesar. Whose image is on us? God's. So give yourselves to God. Give the coin to Caesar. Who cares, right? I always thought that was really interesting, that Jesus kind of begs that question and lets it go. But the Herodians were like, well, we did not expect this, and they leave. So on that day, some of the Sadducees, so now we have the different sect, right? The Sadducees come, and they say, who say that there is no resurrection, and they say, teacher, Moses said, if a man dies, leaving no children, his brother as next of kin shall marry his widow and raise children for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. So they immediately dive into it. There were 7 brothers, okay? In the interest of time, she marries the first brother. They don't have any kids. He dies. So she marries the next brother, right? And so on down the line. So they all end up marrying the same person because she never has any kids. Then she dies. And they say, when you get to heaven, whose wife is she? So in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had married her, right? I always found this passage really funny because who are the Sadducees, right? The difference between them and the Pharisees. They're sad, you see, right? So they don't believe in a resurrection. So they come to Jesus, and naturally the first question they ask is about the resurrection. Because it doesn't matter what they're asking. They're just trying to get him to stumble. They're like, we don't really care. And so Jesus points that out, right? You were all wrong because you know neither the Scriptures, which teach the resurrection, nor the power of God, right? To people who have studied this their entire lives. For in the resurrection, neither men marry, nor are women given in marriage, but they are like angels in heaven who do not marry nor produce children. But as to the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what God said to you? So, see, that's where exactly Jesus picks right up on it. He says, but as to the resurrection of the dead, because I know you don't believe it, even though you're asking me about it, right? And then he continues on. I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. What does that mean? As for the resurrection, God is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. It's kind of a weird statement. Yeah. He's God of everybody, right? I think what Jesus is pointing out is that when God's talking about this, right, he's talking, and this is in Exodus, right? That passage that he quoted. So this is in Exodus. He's talking to the Israelites, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And God does not say, I was the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, right? He says, I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. Just like you guys totally misunderstanding this. It's not even that death is, you're viewing death as like transition, right? God is God eternal. And the soul, the spirit is eternal, right? God is the God of the living, right? So we're viewing this all wrong because we're thinking, oh, well, first of all, it's going to be the same when we're resurrected, right? And then you're having this difficult conception, you're having a difficult time conceiving what's really going on here. God is the God of the living. It's different in the afterlife, but we're living, right?
That scripture where Lazarus, he says, oh, he's not dead, he's sleeping.
He's not dead, he's sleeping.
He's
Yeah.
telling them that,
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to get through, my goodness. This next session is the Greatest Commandment, which is many hours of study have been spent on this section, so we'll get through it in 30 seconds. One of them, a lawyer, comes to Jesus. He asks him a question. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replies to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second, right, is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depended on these 2 commandments. Right? Like I said, many hours have been devoted to analyzing those few verses, and it's very worth it to go back through and read them and study them, but unfortunately we do not have time today. So, but I do want to point out this next section, which is really interesting, because we have this whole call and response. Yeah, you guys can go if you need to. It's okay. We have this whole call and response, right? And then we get to the very end of this chapter, and what we have is Jesus asks them a question. He says, okay, what do you Pharisees think of the Christ? Whose son is he? And they say to him, the son of David. He says, well, David says that this person, the Christ, is my Lord. So how's that work? And they have no clue, and they can't answer him. And it says at the very end, this is a very good bookend, no one was able to say a word to him in answer, nor from that day on did anyone dare to question him anymore. And that's going to lead us into the next chapters for next week. So thank you guys for your attention. I appreciate you guys bearing with me. Did everybody like discussing it, breaking into groups? Not like it? Feedback? It was okay? Yeah? Don't like talking to your brothers and sisters? No? Okay. Well, then I might try and do that again, but thank you guys. Appreciate it.